There's something powerful about silence, not the kind that makes you feel alone, but the kind that makes you finally hear asterisk. In a world that's addicted to noise, where everyone is shouting to be heard and everything is competing for your attention, there exists a whisper. Not just any whisper, one that somehow speaks louder than the chaos. It doesn't force its way in, it waits. It waits for the moment you quiet everything else long enough to listen. Most people are looking for signs, for lightning bolts, for something dramatic to jolt them into belief or action. But often, the most life-changing moments aren't loud at all. They come when you're still, when you're tired of pretending, when you're ready to be real. And in that moment, when the world is quiet and your heart is open, you don't hear condemnation, you don't hear pressure. You hear love, you hear peace, you hear a whisper saying you are more than this moment. That whisper carries a presence. It carries comfort, conviction, clarity. It doesn't flatter, but it always tells the truth. And the truth, spoken in that soft, undeniable way, begins to cut through all the lies you've believed. Lies that said you're not enough. Lies that said your past defines your future. Lies that said you have to perform to be accepted. When that whisper comes, the lies start falling like chains. Not because you shouted them down, but because truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard. This whisper comes when you're broken, when you're at the end of yourself. It finds you in your lowest place, not to shame you, but to remind you that you were never meant to stay there. It says get up, not with judgment, but with gentle strength. It breathes courage into you before you even move. And when you do get up, you realize you didn't do it alone. You were lifted, quietly, powerfully. Sometimes it speaks through a song that hits too deep to be random. Sometimes it comes through a conversation that pierces your soul without warning. Other times it's in the quiet corner of a room where you sit alone, and suddenly, without a word, you are seen. You are known, you are loved, and somehow everything starts to shift. You don't always realize transformation while it's happening. But looking back, you'll see it was in those whispered moments where the biggest shifts occurred. Not when the crowds were cheering, not when everything looked good on the outside, but when you were still enough to hear that quiet voice on the inside saying, "This is not the end. There is more for you, and maybe the world won't understand it. Maybe people will question it. But when you've heard that whisper, truly heard it, you don't need validation. You've tasted something real, something the world can't give you, and it sure can't take away. That whisper becomes your anchor. When life gets loud again, when storms hit, when doubt creeps in, you go back to that moment. That quiet, sacred moment when something inside you awakened. It's not about emotion, it's not about hype, it's about truth, and truth, when whispered in love, carries more weight than the loudest lie ever could. It calls you higher, it reminds you of who you were always meant to be, and it does so without force, without pressure, without fear. So if you've been waiting for thunder, if you've been chasing lightning, maybe it's time to stop running and start listening. The voice you're looking for isn't shouting over you. It's waiting underneath all the noise, waiting to be heard, waiting to whisper the words that will change your life forever. You just have to be still long enough to hear it. There's something truly remarkable about watching someone go from invisible to undeniable, not because the world suddenly gave them a platform, but because something awakened within them. That spark, that flame, that shift that turns an ordinary life into something extraordinary, it doesn't come from titles, it doesn't come from applause, and it definitely doesn't come from trying to be like everyone else. It comes from something deeper, something ignited in the soul. You don't need a stage to be powerful. You don't need a spotlight to shine. What you need is fire on the inside, the kind that burns through fear, through doubt, through everything that once held you back. That fire doesn't start in a moment of confidence. It starts when you finally decide that who you've been is not all you were made to be. It starts in the quiet decision to let go of what's comfortable and step into what's possible. And that fire, it's not always flashy. It doesn't always look like bold declarations or big moves. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence to keep going when no one's cheering. Sometimes it's choosing forgiveness when revenge would feel easier. Sometimes it's saying yes to growth when staying stuck would be more familiar. That's the fire, that's the transformation, and it happens long before the results are visible to anyone else. You've seen it in people who walk into a room and carry a presence that can't be explained. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're not chasing validation, but something about them radiates power, peace, authority. That's not personality. That's purpose. That's someone who's been through the fire and chose not to burn, they chose to shine. That kind of strength isn't taught in textbooks. It's forged in surrender. And when that surrender is real, when that fire is lit, everything begins to change. It changes how you see yourself. You stop measuring your worth by what you've done and start standing in who you're becoming. You begin to walk differently, not arrogantly, but boldly, not recklessly, but courageously. The opinions that once controlled you begin to lose their grip. The shame that once silenced you gets replaced by a quiet confidence that says, I've been refined and I'm not going back. This is what happens when that fire takes over. Fear doesn't disappear, but it no longer drives you. Doubt might whisper, but it doesn't define you. You start making choices that align with purpose instead of pressure. You stop settling, you stop shrinking. You stop hiding, and it's not because you're trying to be something you're not. It's because you're finally stepping into who you are. There's a moment when you realize that everything you thought disqualified you, your failures, your flaws, your pain, were actually the kindling for the fire. That's the beauty of it. Nothing is wasted. The very things that tried to break you become the things that shape you. And the more you lean into that truth, the stronger the fire grows. People may not understand it. They may ask what changed. But you'll know that something was awakened in you that no one can shut down. You'll know that this isn't about hype, it's about transformation. Real, lasting transformation that shifts atmospheres, restores relationships, revives dreams, and brings dead things back to life. You don't have to wait for permission to live on fire. You don't have to earn it. You just have to be willing to receive it, to welcome it in, to let it burn away what no longer serves you, and to step forward with the flame still burning. Because when that fire is real, it shows up in your words, in your walk, in your work. You don't even have to announce it. People feel it, they see it, they're drawn to it, not because of you, but because of what's working through you. And here's the truth. The most powerful version of you isn't found in striving. It's found in surrender. That's when the fire comes. That's when ordinary becomes extraordinary. And that's when your life becomes a living proof of what happens when you stop chasing the world and start walking in power. Because when the fire is within you, no one can put it out. There's a moment, one that doesn't get talked about enough, when you realize that all your plans, all your strategies, all your efforts to control every outcome just aren't working anymore. You've done everything you were supposed to do. You've checked every box, and yet something's still missing. It's frustrating, isn't it? Because the world told you that if you just worked hard enough, if you planned well enough, you could build the life you wanted. But then life happens, and it's in that space between control and collapse that the real transformation begins. We don't like losing control. We resist it with everything we've got. Control feels safe. It feels predictable. It gives us the illusion of power, but transformation doesn't happen where there's control. It happens where there's surrender. And that's the paradox. The very thing we cling to is the very thing that's holding us back. Sometimes it's not our weakness that's stopping us. It's our unwillingness to let go. Because there comes a point when you've got to ask, what if the breakthrough I've been praying for is waiting on the other side of letting go? What if the door isn't locked? I'm just holding the handle too tightly to open it. Letting go isn't giving up. It's not quitting. It's a courageous act of trust. It's saying, I'm done trying to fix this in my own strength. I'm done pretending I know what's best. I'm done carrying what was never mine to carry. That's when something shifts. That's when peace enters the storm. That's when clarity starts to emerge, not because the situation changed, but because you changed. Transformation begins where control ends. That's not a cute phrase. That's a lived reality. Some of the most powerful people you'll ever meet didn't get there by holding everything together. They got there by falling apart and finally letting something greater take over. They learned how to stop striving and start receiving. And that posture, that open-handed, surrendered posture, is where real change starts to take root. You see, when you try to control everything, you limit what can be done in your life. You end up operating in your own capacity. And let's be honest, that capacity is limited. But when you surrender, when you open up space for something greater to work in and through you, you access a power that doesn't run dry, a wisdom that doesn't fail, a strength that's not dependent on how you feel or what's happening around you. It's scary, yes, letting go always is. It feels like free-falling at first, but it's not falling into nothing. It's falling into purpose, into guidance, into peace. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You stop surviving and start truly becoming. Sometimes you don't even know how much control you've been holding until you feel the weight lift. Until you finally breathe. Until the burden you've been dragging around suddenly feels lighter. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your grip did. You stopped knuckling your way through life and started trusting that maybe, just maybe, you were never meant to carry it all on your own. And the beautiful part, when you surrender, you begin to discover who you really are, not the version of you that had to perform, not the version of you that lived in fear, but the version that was hidden underneath all that striving. The real you, the bold you, the free you, that version has been waiting to emerge, and it can't rise until control is laid down. So don't be afraid to let go. Don't be afraid of the unknown. That space where your plans end is the space where transformation begins. You won't be left empty-handed. You won't fall apart forever. Something new will rise, something stronger, something purer, but it only comes when you release your grip on the way you thought things had to be. Because the moment you stop holding on so tightly is the moment you finally become available for the life that was always meant for you. There's a kind of strength that doesn't come from willpower or grit. It's not something you can fake, not something you can hype yourself into. It's the kind of strength that finds you when you've come to the end of yourself, when the mask falls off, the noise fades, and you finally admit, I can't fix this on my own. That's when it shows up, quietly, powerfully, with presence, with healing, with a kind of peace that makes no sense but changes everything. Because what we often forget is that revival doesn't always look like fireworks. Restoration doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting in silence, tears running down their face, finally letting go of years of pain. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, you're still here and that's enough. Sometimes it's that subtle shift inside your heart where shame turns into hope, not all at once, but piece by piece. We think power looks like standing tall, pushing through, being unshaken, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break, to let the pieces fall so that something deeper, something more whole, can be built in their place. And when that power begins to work in you, it doesn't just patch you up, it rewrites you. It takes what was broken and makes it beautiful. Not perfect asterisk, real asterisk. And real is where lives are changed. You know, that part of your story you thought disqualified you. That chapter you tried to skip over, that moment you've buried so deep you almost forgot it happened. That's the very place where rebuilding begins, because what's been shattered can be restored. What's been buried in guilt can be resurrected in grace. You don't have to pretend you never fell. You just need to know that falling isn't where your story ends. Revival means you come alive again, and not in the way the world defines life, not chasing highs or distractions, but fully alive, clear, grounded, free. And it's not about having it all together. It's about being rooted in something deeper than your circumstances. You begin to live from a place of peace that doesn't waver, from a source of strength that's not your own, from a love that refuses to leave you where it found you. This power rebuilds your identity. It silences the voice that said you're not enough. It rewrites the lie that you'll always be broken, and it does it not with force, but with relentless kindness. You don't have to fight for healing. It's already been offered. You don't have to earn restoration. It's already in motion. The question is, are you willing to receive it? Because healing doesn't always feel like victory at first. Sometimes it feels like grief, like letting go, like mourning what you thought life was supposed to be. But in that space, in that sacred undoing, something new begins to rise, slowly, steadily, and when it does, you're not the same person who broke. You're wiser, stronger, more whole, not because the pain didn't happen, but because it no longer owns you. And once that restoration begins in you, it starts to move through you. You become a voice of hope to others who feel lost. You become a safe place for people who are barely holding on, and not because you're perfect, but because you remember asterisk. You remember what it's like to be in the dark and to see the light return. You remember what it feels like to fall and to be lifted again. That's power, real power, not the kind that dominates or intimidates, the kind that heals. The kind that rebuilds homes, restores relationships, revives hearts, and reminds people that they are never too far gone. That it's never too late, that no matter how deep the pit, there's still a way out, still a way forward. So if you feel broken, if you feel tired, if you feel like there's nothing left, don't walk away. Don't give up. The very place where you feel most lost might be the place where you're about to be found. The pieces of your life aren't wasted. They're being put back together in a way you never imagined, stronger, deeper, wiser, more alive than ever before. And when that happens, you won't just be someone who was healed. You'll be someone who carries healing,